The gate had been padlocked for 6 hours before I realized Doralee Finch wasn't just blocking my road, she'd already sold it. Sold it to a company I'd never heard of for a project I knew nothing about, using paperwork that didn't even have my name on it. By the time I found out what she'd actually done, bulldozers were already idling at the edge of my property, waiting for permission that was never hers to give. If you're new here, this is the channel for real stories about HOA power grabs, property fights, and the moments when entitled people finally meet a force bigger than themselves. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens when the woman who stole my road finds out exactly what she signed away with it. My name's Garrick Voss, and 3 years ago I inherited 11 acres at the dead end of Brindlewood Pass from my uncle Otis, a stubborn old timber surveyor who'd carved the access road himself back in 1974, decades before the Whisperwood Ridge HOA ever existed. The road cut straight through what later became the development's western boundary, but Otis had recorded an easement, plain and simple. My road, my right to use it, forever. I didn't think about it much until Doralee Finch became HOA president and decided the dead-end gravel road behind her property line was an eyesore ruining her view of the ridge. At first, it was small things, a community beautification notice asking me to repave at my own expense to match the development's aesthetic, then a letter claiming my fence was 3 feet over a boundary that hadn't been surveyed since the Reagan administration. I ignored most of it because Otis always said paperwork wars are how people with too much time bury people with real jobs. I was wrong to think that meant I was safe. The first real shock came on a Tuesday morning when a construction crew showed up at the gate with bulldozers, claiming they had permission to widen the road for emergency resort access. I stood in front of the gate in my work boots, coffee still in hand, completely blindsided because nobody owns rights to widen a private easement without the easement holder's consent. The foreman, a weathered guy named Cassius Pell, looked just as confused as I was. He showed me paperwork signed by someone named Doralee Finch, granting access rights to a company called Hearthstone Ridge Resorts. I'd never heard of it. Neither had most of the HOA, it turned out. That's when I learned the resort wasn't some outside developer swooping in. Hearthstone Ridge Resorts was a shell company, and its sole officer was Doralee's brother-in-law, a quiet, unremarkable man named Phineas Odia, who'd spent the last 2 years buying up failing vacation properties in the county under different LLCs. Doralee hadn't just decided she didn't like my road. She'd been planning, for over a year, to consolidate the entire ridge, my land included, into a private luxury retreat, and my ugly gravel eyesore was actually the only drivable route from the highway to the resort's planned site. She didn't want my road gone. She wanted it converted, rezoned, and folded into resort property, with me either bought out or pushed out. I refused to sign anything, which infuriated her more than I expected, because apparently the resort's entire investor pitch deck had already listed the access road as secured. She told her own brother-in-law it was a done deal before it was anywhere close to one. Pressure started coming from directions I hadn't anticipated. Not lawyers, not the HOA board, but neighbors. People I'd waved to for years started avoiding eye contact. I found out later Doralee had been quietly telling residents that my refusal to cooperate was the reason their property values were stagnant, that I was the lone holdout blocking a transformational investment for the whole community. She turned me into the villain in a story she invented. The strangest twist came from someone I never expected, Doralee's own teenage niece, a sharp, restless girl named Marshal, who worked weekends at the county records office for an internship credit. She slipped me copies of internal resort planning documents, not out of loyalty to me, but because she'd overheard her aunt and uncle joking about how my land's restrictive fire access easement was an annoying technicality they planned to quietly bypass during construction permitting. Marshal didn't like how casually they talked about cutting corners on fire safety. She said it scared her. That detail changed everything. Otis's original 1974 easement not just guaranteed my access, it specifically designated the road as the sole emergency fire and evacuation route for that entire ridge, a detail buried in county archives because the ridge had never been densely developed until Whisperwood Ridge HOA built 50 homes practically overlooking a canyon with only one way out. Doralee's resort plan, if it absorbed my easement and rerouted it through private resort property with a guarded checkpoint, would have created a choke point. In a fire-wild evacuation, residents could be trapped behind a gate controlled by a private hospitality company more concerned with guest privacy than emergency response. I didn't go to a lawyer. I went to Wendell Achebe, the county fire marshal, a man Otis used to play dominoes with, and I showed him the original 1974 recordings alongside the resort's quiet permitting paperwork. Wendell didn't seem alarmed at first until he cross-referenced the resort's proposed checkpoint gate location with the HOA's existing emergency evacuation plan, the one filed years ago, the one nobody had updated since the resort scheme began forming. The HOA's official fire evacuation route ran directly through my road. Doralee's gate, the bulldozers, the resort checkpoint, all of it would have been illegally obstructed the only sanctioned evacuation path for 50 homes. 3 weeks later, during a routine inspection triggered by Wendell's findings, fire investigators discovered something nobody, including Doralee, had accounted for: brush clearance violations stretching across multiple HOA-managed greenbelts, ignored for years because the HOA had redirected maintenance funds toward resort partnership consulting fees paid to Phineas Oduya's shell companies. The HOA hadn't just neglected fire safety, they'd been funneling community dues into Doralee's family business while leaving dry brush to pile up along the only viable escape route. When the fire marshal's office issued an emergency shutdown order, it wasn't dramatic flashing lights or a viral confrontation. It was quiet, procedural, and devastating. The HOA was barred from approving any new construction, including the resort tie-in, until every violation was remediated, a process that would take months and drain reserves the HOA didn't have, especially with dues secretly diverted for over a year. Doralee's entire investment pitch collapsed overnight, not because of me, not because of a courtroom, but because her own greed had blinded her to the one thing she should have protected first. The final twist came when Marshal told me the resort deal had one more hidden clause. If the access road conversion failed for any reason tied to safety violations, the investors had a contractual right to claim damages directly from Doralee personally, since she'd personally guaranteed the easement transfer in writing to secure their funding. She hadn't just lost the resort, she'd lost her own savings trying to steal something that was never hers to sell. I still live at the end of Brindlewood Pass, gravel road and all. Wendell had the fire route officially redesignated and protected under county code, untouchable now by any future HOA president with resort dreams. Doralee resigned not long after, quietly, without a goodbye letter to the neighborhood she'd convinced to resent me. Marshal still visits sometimes, mostly to see the ridge she helped save, though she'll never admit that's why she really comes.